The crystal wine glass shattered against the hardwood floor, red liquid spreading across the oak like blood from a fresh wound. But that wasn't what shattered. It was the wine that had been in my face 3 seconds earlier, dripping from my hair, staining my white dress shirt, burning my eyes. My wife's father, Richard Montgomery, stood at the head of his dining table with an empty glass in his hand and pure contempt in his eyes. My wife's younger sister, Jessica, was laughing so hard she had to grip the table edge for support. "Thanks, Dad." Jessica managed between gasps. "Maybe that'll teach him some respect." "Filthy pig." I felt my hands grip the chair beneath me. The entire Montgomery family was watching. My wife, Vanessa, sat frozen beside me, her face unreadable. Her mother, Patricia, had her hand over her mouth, but I couldn't tell if it was shock or suppressed amusement. Her brother Tyler was staring at his plate like he wanted to disappear. And Richard, he was still standing there, chest puffed out like he'd just done something heroic. I stood up slowly. The room went quiet except for Jessica's fading giggles. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My fingers were steady despite the rage coursing through my veins. I scrolled to a contact I never thought I'd use at a family dinner and pressed call. "Davies," I said when the line connected. "It's time. Execute everything we discussed." I hung up. The room was dead silent now. Even Jessica had stopped laughing. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They had no idea what I'd built, what I controlled, or what I was about to take away from them. But they were about to find out. My name is Connor Harrison. I'm 42 years old, and until that New Year's Eve dinner, most people would have described me as a quiet, unassuming man who worked in finance. What they didn't know was that quiet doesn't mean weak and unassuming doesn't mean powerless. I'd spent the last 15 years building something bigger than the Montgomery family could comprehend. And I'd spent the last 6 months preparing for this exact moment. If you're enjoying this story and want to hear how everything unfolds, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment below telling me what you would have done in this situation. And smash that like button because this story is about to get absolutely wild. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. The Montgomerys had never respected me. Not from the day I married Vanessa 8 years ago. To them, I was the son-in-law who didn't come from old money, who didn't have the right pedigree, who didn't belong in their world of country clubs and charity galas. Richard had made his fortune in commercial real estate back in the 80s, bought up properties when they were cheap, developed them, and rode the wave of urban renewal. He considered himself a self-made man, which made his disdain for me particularly ironic. Connor works in finance, he'd tell people at parties, putting just enough emphasis on the word to make it sound dirty. Some sort of investment thing. I don't really understand what he does. The truth was, Richard understood perfectly well what I did. He just couldn't stand that I'd become more successful than him without his help. I ran a private equity fund that specialized in distressed assets, commercial properties that were failing, companies on the verge of bankruptcy, developments that couldn't secure financing. I'd buy them for pennies on the dollar, restructure them, and either turn them profitable or flip them for substantial gains. My fund managed north of $300 million, and my personal net worth was somewhere around $70 million. But the Montgomerys didn't know any of this. To them, I was just Connor, the quiet guy who nodded politely at Richard's stories and never argued when he criticized my career choices. Vanessa knew, of course. She'd seen the bank statements, signed the tax returns, but she'd never corrected her family's assumptions about my success. That should have been my first warning sign. The problem started small. Richard would make jokes about my clothes at family gatherings. "Connor, did you buy that suit at a department store?" Tyler would talk about his law firm in a way that implied my work was somehow less legitimate. Patricia would ask when we were planning to buy a bigger house, as if our 4-bedroom colonial wasn't sufficient. And Jessica, she was the worst of all. She'd married a hedge fund manager named Bradley Cortland, who made a point of discussing his bonus structure at every family dinner. "Bradley's firm is projecting 30% returns this year," Jessica would say, looking directly at me. "What kind of returns does your little fund get, Connor?" I'd smile politely and change the subject. Let them think what they wanted. My fund had averaged 42% returns over the past decade, but there was no point in correcting their assumptions. I'd learned early in my marriage that the Montgomerys weren't interested in facts that contradicted their narrative. Vanessa had been different when we first met. She was working as a curator at a contemporary art gallery, passionate about her career, determined to make her own mark outside her family's influence. I fell in love with her independence, her sharp wit, the way she could discuss everything from abstract expressionism to behavioral economics. But slowly, year by year, she drifted back into her family's orbit, started going to more Montgomery family events, started adopting their attitudes, started looking at me the way they looked at me. 6 months before that New Year's dinner, something changed. Vanessa started taking phone calls in other rooms, started going to book club meetings that lasted until midnight. Started getting her nails done and her hair colored with a frequency that seemed excessive even by her standards. I'm not stupid. I know the signs. So, I did what any smart man would do. I hired a private investigator. His name was Marcus Fleming, former FBI agent now running his own discreet investigation firm. Within 2 weeks, he had everything. Photographs, video, phone records, text messages. Vanessa was having an affair with Jackson Sinclair, a gallery owner who'd been pursuing her for over a year. They'd been meeting at his downtown loft 3 times a week. The messages between them were explicit, detailed, and filled with mockery of me. Connor has no idea, one message read. He's so clueless. Just sits there with his spreadsheets and his quiet little life. Another one cut deeper. He's exactly what my father said. A nobody pretending to be somebody. I sat in my office reading those messages, feeling something cold and hard settle in my chest. Not heartbreak exactly, more like clarity. The woman I'd married didn't exist anymore, if she ever had. What remained was a Montgomery who'd married beneath her station and was now looking for an upgrade. That's when I started planning. Richard Montgomery's commercial real estate empire wasn't as solid as it appeared. I knew this because I'd been tracking his properties for years, not because I was planning anything, but because that's what I did professionally. I analyzed commercial real estate markets, identified vulnerabilities, and positioned my fund to capitalize on opportunities. And Richard's portfolio was full of vulnerabilities. He owned 12 properties in the metro area, mostly older commercial buildings that he'd bought decades ago. 3 of them had mortgages that were coming due within the next year, and based on current market valuations, he'd have trouble refinancing. 2 others were significantly underoccupied, probably hemorrhaging cash every month. And his flagship property, the Montgomery Tower downtown, had a major tenant whose lease was expiring in 6 months. I spent the next several months quietly positioning my pieces. I approached Richard's largest tenant through a third party and offered them better terms in a building my fund owned. They jumped at it. I contacted the banks holding his mortgages and expressed interest in buying the notes at a discount if Richard defaulted. And I started accumulating information on every Montgomery family asset I could find. Tyler's law firm was struggling. He was a mediocre attorney writing on his family name, and several of his major clients were unhappy with his work. I documented everything. Jessica's husband, Bradley, wasn't quite the success story she made him out to be. His hedge fund had underperformed the market for 3 consecutive years, and several investors were pulling their money. I confirmed it through my network. Even Patricia had secrets. She'd been borrowing money from Richard to support a shopping addiction that would make most people's eyes water. By the time New Year's Eve rolled around, I had a complete picture of the Montgomery family's financial house of cards. All I needed was the right moment to push it over. The New Year's dinner started normally enough. Vanessa and I arrived at the Montgomery estate at 6, joining Tyler and his wife Melissa, Jessica, and Bradley, and of course, Richard and Patricia. The house was decorated with that expensive good taste that money can buy, but class has to cultivate. Crystal everywhere, fresh flowers, a catered meal that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Richard held court at the head of the table, discussing his latest acquisition, a strip mall in the suburbs that he claimed would be transformative for the area. Tyler talked about a case he was working on, exaggerating his role to make himself sound more impressive. Jessica and Bradley discussed their recent vacation to St. Bart's, making sure everyone knew exactly how exclusive their resort had been. I sat quietly eating my meal, responding when spoken to, but not volunteering much. This was my normal role at these dinners. The quiet son-in-law who didn't quite measure up. Connor, Richard said about halfway. Through the main course. I was talking to Bill Hendricks at the club last week. He mentioned your firm tried to buy one of his properties. I looked up. We make a lot of acquisition attempts. I'd have to check which property you're referring to. The warehouse complex on Industrial Boulevard, Richard said. Bill said you offered him about 30% below market value. He was insulted. I smiled politely. We offer what the property is worth based on our analysis. If Mr. Hendricks believes it's worth more, he's welcome to find another buyer. That's the problem with your generation, Richard said, warming to his subject. No respect for established relationships. No understanding that business is built on trust and reputation, not just numbers on a spreadsheet. I prefer to let the numbers speak for themselves, I replied. Richard's face wrinkled slightly. He didn't like being contradicted, even politely. Numbers don't tell the whole story, Connor. That's what you don't understand. Bill Hendricks and I have been doing business for 30 years. There's value in that relationship that your spreadsheets can't quantify. I could have told him that Bill Hendricks was 3 months behind on his mortgage payments and would likely be forced to sell within the year, probably to me at an even lower price than I'd originally offered, but I didn't. I just nodded and went back to my meal. That's when Jessica jumped in. Connor just doesn't understand how real business works, she said. Bradley says investment funds like his are basically just vultures picking at carcasses. Bradley shifted uncomfortably. He'd never said anything like that, at least not in my presence. But Jessica loved putting words in his mouth to make herself look better. Investment funds serve an important function in the market, I said calmly. We provide liquidity and capital to businesses that need it. You provide exploitation, Jessica said, emboldened by the wine she'd been drinking. You buy things cheap from desperate people and sell them for profit. That's not business. That's theft. I felt Vanessa's hand on my arm, a warning to let it go. I looked at her, saw the familiar expression that meant, don't make waves. Don't embarrass the family. I wondered if Jackson Sinclair ever got that look, or if she saved it just for me. I think we should change the subject, Vanessa said quietly. But Richard wasn't done. No, let's talk about this, he said. I want to understand Connor's business philosophy. Help me understand how buying distressed properties at fire sale prices is anything other than taking advantage of people's misfortunes. I set down my fork carefully. Would you prefer those properties sit empty? Would you prefer those businesses declare bankruptcy and lay off all their employees? Because that's the alternative. I buy assets that are failing and turn them into something productive. I save jobs. I create value where there was none. You create value for yourself, Richard shot back. Don't dress it up as charity. I never claimed it was charity, I said. It's business, which is more than I can say for holding on to properties that are bleeding cash every month just because you're too proud to admit the market has changed. The room went very quiet. I'd crossed a line by implying Richard's business wasn't as successful as he claimed. Tyler was staring at his plate. Jessica's eyes were wide with shock. Patricia looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Richard stood up slowly. His face was the color of raw beef. How dare you, he said, his voice shaking with rage. How dare you come into my home and insult me? I'm not insulting you, I said, staying seated. I'm stating a fact. Commercial real estate is changing. The methods that worked in the 80s don't work anymore. You need to adapt or you'll get left behind. Get out, Richard said. Get out of my house. That's when Vanessa made her choice. Instead of defending me or trying to calm the situation, she turned to me with cold eyes and said, Connor, maybe we should leave. Not maybe he's being unreasonable. Not maybe you should both calm down. Just maybe we should leave. As if I was the problem. Something inside me crystallized in that moment. I stood up, but I didn't walk toward the door. Instead, I walked toward Richard. He grabbed the wine glass in front of him, and before I could say a word, he threw the contents directly in my face. The red wine hit me like a slap, cold and shocking. It got in my eyes, my nose, soaked into my shirt. Jessica started laughing immediately. That cruel, delighted laugh that said, finally, someone put him in his place. And then came those words that sealed their fate. Thanks, Dad. Maybe that'll teach him some respect, filthy pig. I felt my hands grip the chair. The rage was there, hot and immediate, but underneath it was something colder. Calculation. I'd been planning this for months, waiting for the right moment. They'd just given it to me. I pulled out my phone and made the call. Davies, I said, it's time. Execute everything we discussed. Malcolm Davies was my attorney, one of the best financial litigators in the state. We'd been preparing for this moment for 3 months, ever since I decided that my marriage was over, and the Montgomery family's treatment of me had crossed from rudeness into active hostility. Connor, what's happening? Vanessa asked as I hung up the phone. There was uncertainty in her voice now. Maybe the first crack in her Montgomery armor. I'm done, I said simply. I'm done being treated like garbage by this family. I'm done being mocked and belittled, and I'm done with you. What are you talking about? Richard demanded. Who did you just call? My attorney, I said. As of this moment, I'm filing for divorce. Vanessa can expect papers to be served tomorrow morning. I'm also filing a civil suit against you, Richard, for assault. That wine you threw wasn't just offensive. It's documented assault on camera. I pulled out my phone and showed them the screen. I'd been recording since I stood up, capturing everything, including Richard throwing the wine. You can't do that, Jessica sputtered. That's illegal. Actually, in this state, I can record anything I want in a private residence if I'm a participant in the conversation. The law is very clear on that. Tyler finally spoke up. Connor, let's all calm down and talk about this rationally. I am being rational, I said. Probably for the first time in 8 years. Davies is also filing motions to freeze all marital assets pending the divorce proceedings, and he's initiating foreclosure procedures on 3 of your properties, Richard. Richard's face went from red to white. What are you talking about? You don't own any of my properties. No, but I own the mortgage notes, I said. I bought them from your banks 3 months ago. You're currently 60 days past due on 2 of them and 30 days past due on the 3rd. I could have worked with you on that, but not anymore. I'm calling the notes due immediately. The room erupted. Everyone was talking at once, but I wasn't done. Tyler, your firm is about to lose the Hendricks account. I bought Bill Hendricks's property yesterday, and he's requested that different counsel handle the transaction. Given your firm's recent performance issues, I suspect he'll be moving all his business elsewhere. Tyler's face went pale. Jessica, you might want to ask Bradley about the redemption requests his fund has been receiving. Last I checked, he's down about 40% of his assets under management this quarter. Turns out underperforming the S&P 500 for 3 consecutive years makes investors nervous. Bradley looked like he was going to be sick. And Patricia, you might want to talk to Richard about the second mortgage he took out on this house to cover your credit card bills. That note's coming due in 6 months. And given the current state of his portfolio, I doubt he'll be able to refinance. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth, but this time it was genuine shock. You're a monster, Vanessa whispered. I looked at my wife, the woman I'd loved. The woman who'd been betraying me with Jackson Sinclair for 6 months. No, I said quietly. I'm just someone who's tired of being treated like nothing by people who are nothing. I walked to the door, wine still dripping from my hair. At the threshold, I turned back one more time. Happy New Year, everyone. I hope it's everything you deserve. The next 72 hours were chaos. Davies worked faster than I'd thought possible, filing all the necessary motions and serving papers to everyone who needed them. Vanessa received divorce papers on January 1st, Richard received foreclosure notices on January 2nd. Tyler's firm received formal notice that the Hendricks account was moving on January 3rd. My phone rang constantly. Vanessa called 16 times the first day, leaving messages that ranged from angry to pleading to angry again. Tyler called, trying to negotiate some kind of settlement. Even Patricia called, crying, asking me to reconsider. I didn't answer any of them. There was nothing left to say. The private investigator's report on Vanessa's affair went to Davies, who incorporated it into the divorce filing. Under our state's laws, adultery affected the division of assets. Vanessa wasn't going to walk away with half of everything I'd built. She'd be lucky to get 20%. Richard's properties were a different matter. The foreclosure process would take months, but the damage to his reputation was immediate. Word spread through the commercial real estate community that Richard Montgomery was overleveraged and facing foreclosure. His other lenders started calling their notes due. His tenants started looking for other spaces. His carefully constructed empire began to crumble. I felt no satisfaction in it, just a cold sense of justice being served. About a week after the dinner, I finally answered one of Vanessa's calls. "Connor, please," she said. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying. "We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," I said. "You're destroying my family." "No, Vanessa, I'm holding your family accountable for years of treating me like trash. There's a difference. My father made a mistake. He was drunk. He didn't mean it." "Your father has been making mistakes for 8 years," I said. Every snide comment, every dismissive gesture. Every time he treated me like I wasn't good enough to marry his daughter. Those weren't mistakes. Those were choices. And now he's living with the consequences. "What about me?" Vanessa asked. "What about our marriage?" I almost laughed. "You mean the marriage you've been betraying for 6 months? The marriage where you let your family mock me and never once stood up for me? That marriage?" Silence. "I know about Jackson," I said quietly. "I've known for 4 months. I have photos, Vanessa. Videos, text messages where you and he laugh about how clueless I am. So, please don't talk to me about our marriage like it means something to you." "Connor, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I was confused. Jackson doesn't mean anything." "Maybe he doesn't," I agreed. "But that just makes it worse. You threw away our marriage for someone who doesn't even matter to you. Can we try again?" Vanessa asked. "Can we go to counseling or something?" "No," I said, "because this isn't about Jackson. This is about who you became. Or maybe who you always were. You let your family treat me like garbage because deep down you agreed with them. You thought I wasn't good enough. And when someone who seemed more exciting came along, you jumped at it. That's not true. Then why didn't you defend me?" I asked. "At that dinner or any other time, why didn't you ever tell your father to back off? Why didn't you ever tell Jessica to shut up? Why didn't you ever act like my wife instead of Richard's daughter?" She didn't have an answer. "The divorce is proceeding. I said Davies will be in touch about the settlement. Given the adultery evidence, don't expect much. And Vanessa, do me a favor. Tell Jackson he can have you. You two deserve each other." I hung up. The legal proceedings took months, as these things always do. Richard fought the foreclosures, but the law was on my side. He'd signed the mortgages. He'd missed the payments. The fact that he didn't know I was the one holding the notes didn't change his legal obligations. His flagship property, Montgomery Tower, was the first to go. I foreclosed and immediately sold it to a development company for a substantial profit. The irony was that the buyer planned to renovate and modernize it, exactly what Richard should have done years ago instead of letting it deteriorate while he collected rent from increasingly desperate tenants. The other 2 properties followed within 3 months. Richard tried to file bankruptcy, but his attorneys told him it wouldn't help. The debts were secured by real estate. Bankruptcy might delay things, but the outcome would be the same. Tyler's law firm managed to survive barely. Losing the Hendricks account hurt, but they had other clients. Tyler himself sent me an email apologizing for his role in the family's treatment of me. I didn't respond. His apology was 20 years too late and motivated entirely by self-interest. Jessica and Bradley had their own problems. Bradley's hedge fund collapsed after a series of bad investments and client redemptions. He ended up taking a job as a financial analyst at someone else's firm, making a fraction of what he'd made before. Jessica divorced him 6 months later. Apparently, a man who couldn't maintain her lifestyle wasn't worth keeping around. The Montgomery family values at work. Patricia moved into a smaller house after Richard had to sell the estate to cover his debts. She called me once asking if I'd consider buying it so she could at least stay in familiar surroundings. I declined. Let someone else own the house where Richard threw wine in my face. The divorce from Vanessa was finalized after 8 months of legal wrangling. She fought for more, claiming emotional distress and arguing that her father's property shouldn't factor into the settlement. Davies destroyed those arguments with the adultery evidence and documentation of my separate property claims. In the end, Vanessa walked away with $200,000 in her car. Given that I was worth $70 million, she'd expected much more. I saw her one last time at the final hearing. She looked different, smaller somehow, like the confidence that came from being a Montgomery had been stripped away. She tried to approach me in the courthouse hallway, but I walked past without acknowledging her. There was nothing left to say. A year after that New Year's dinner, I was sitting in my new office overlooking the city skyline. My fund had grown to $400 million in assets under management. I'd acquired 2 more properties in the downtown core and was in negotiations for a third. Business was good. Better than good. My assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Harrison, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important." I looked up from my computer. "Who is it?" "Says her name is Amanda Richardson. She's a curator at the Contemporary Art Museum." I felt a small jolt of interest. I'd been a patron of the museum since my divorce, attending gallery openings and exhibitions. Art had become a refuge, a reminder that there was beauty and meaning beyond balance sheets and property acquisitions. "Send her in," I said. Amanda walked into my office with the confidence of someone who knows what she wants. She was probably in her mid-30s with auburn hair and intelligent eyes that took in everything about the space in a single glance. "Mr. Harrison," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for seeing me without an appointment." "Call me Connor," I said, shaking her hand. "What can I do for you?" "I'm here to ask for money," she said bluntly. "The museum is planning a major expansion, and we're seeking donors who understand the value of art in our community." I smiled despite myself. "That's a refreshingly direct approach." "I don't believe in wasting people's time," Amanda said. "You're a successful businessman. You value efficiency, so I'm being efficient." We talked for an hour about the museum's plans, about contemporary art, about the role of culture in urban development. Amanda was brilliant, passionate, and completely unimpressed by my wealth or success. She cared about art, about the museum, about creating something meaningful for the community. When she left, I'd committed to donating $5 million to the expansion project. I also asked her to dinner. She said yes. The Montgomery family faded into memory over the following year. I heard through various channels that Richard had taken a job with a property management company, essentially working for someone else after decades of being his own boss. Tyler was still practicing law, still mediocre. Jessica had remarried, this time to a man who worked in insurance. Patricia had gotten her spending under control. Or maybe she just didn't have Richard's money to spend anymore. Vanessa moved to California. Someone told me she was working at a gallery in Los Angeles trying to restart the career she'd abandoned when she married into the Montgomery lifestyle. I wished her well in the abstract way you wish well for someone who used to matter but doesn't anymore. Amanda and I dated for 6 months before I asked her to move in with me. She said yes, but with conditions. She kept her apartment as a studio space. She maintained her independence. She made it clear that she was with me because she wanted to be, not because she needed anything from me. It was exactly what I needed. On New Year's Eve, exactly 2 years after Richard threw wine in my face, Amanda and I hosted a dinner party at my penthouse. The guest list included Davies and his wife Marcus Fleming and his partner, several colleagues from my fund, and a handful of Amanda's friends from the art world. At midnight, as champagne flowed and everyone celebrated, Amanda pulled me aside onto the balcony. "You know what I love about you?" she asked. "My devastating good looks and charm," I suggested. She laughed. "No." "Well, yes, but that's not what I was going to say. I love that you know your worth. You don't need anyone to validate you. You don't need anyone to tell you you're successful or smart or valuable. You just are." I pulled her close, looking out at the city lights spread below us. I had to learn that the hard way. The best lessons usually are. Amanda said. We stood there in the cold January air, listening to the sounds of celebration inside, and I realized something important. The Montgomery family had thought they were teaching me a lesson when they treated me like I wasn't good enough. What they'd actually taught me was that being good enough for the wrong people means nothing. I'd built my success on my own terms. I'd walked away from people who didn't value me. And I'd found someone who loved me, not despite who I was, but because of it. That whine in my face had been the wake-up call I needed. Not to prove anything to the Montgomerys, but to prove something to myself, that I deserved better, that I was worth more than they'd ever given me credit for. And as Amanda and I walked back inside to join our friends, I realized that the best revenge wasn't destroying the Montgomery family. The best revenge was building a life so good they couldn't touch it even if they tried. Richard Montgomery had thrown wine in my face, thinking he was putting me in my place. What he'd actually done was set me free. And for that, I suppose I should thank him. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about standing up for yourself or knowing your worth, I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had a moment where someone's disrespect actually pushed you towards something better? Share your story below. And if you found value in this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more real stories about ordinary people finding extraordinary strength. Until next time, remember that sometimes the people who treat you worse teach you the best lessons about who you are and what you deserve. This is where the story ends. How was today's story? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and where you're watching from. Like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories.